All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are right at the top of the hour, so we'll get started since all of our presenters are here today. Welcome to the NAGT webinar. This webinar series is your one-stop shop for strengthening work in Earth education. Webinars in the series feature novel and innovative work in Earth education, research, and pedagogy, new teaching materials, and the classroom and professional experience of people like you. Our webinar series is free and open to the public, and we encourage you to invite your colleagues to attend and join the discussion. On the screen and linked in the chat is a link to the webinar series where you can find the webinar schedule, an archive of past events, and information on our sponsoring projects and programs. You can find slides, resources, and recordings of each webinars, including today's up in a couple days, through the webinar archives. I know everyone has probably seen Zoom controls, Zoom instructions before, but just a quick reminder, we're going to ask that you leave your microphones muted and your cameras off. If you have questions and comments throughout the presentation, we encourage you to enter those into the chat box, and our presenters and staff will be monitoring the chat, so we should be able to answer your questions throughout, but we'll also have a time for discussion and questions at the end. A reminder that participants in all NAGT meetings and events are expected to abide by the NAGT Code of Conduct, which applies in all venues, events, and online forums associated with NAGT. If you haven't seen it before, the Code of Conduct policy is also linked in the chat, so you can check that out for details. Today's webinar is titled, What Does Research Look Like at the Introduction Level, such as at 2YC's, presented by a whole smorgasbord of presenters, including Kasia Kraft, David Voorhees, Nicole Curvini, sorry, Nicole, Kasali Gadmaj, Laura Gerton, Gretchen Miller, and Sean Tavalia. Thank you all so much for participating. We are so excited that you are here today, and I will hand it over to Kasia to take it away.
Thanks so much, Bradley. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I didn't really think about you might have to see things on my desktop. All right, let's get this going. So we're talking about what does research look like at the introduction level, such as at 2YC's, and we'll talk a little bit about why we have research in quotes and whether that should be in quotes or not. But to get started, just to, again, sort of introduce who's going to be talking today. So I'm Kasia Kraft, I'm at Whatcom Community College. Dave Voorhees is at Waubonsie, and this is the order of sort of some of the different people who we've invited to join us today to share what they're doing at their institutions. Laura Gerton is at Penn State, Sean Tavalia at Suffolk County Community College, Nicole at Mesa Community College, Nicole Cervini, Gretchen Miller at Wake Technical Community College, and Kusali Gamage at Austin Community College. And I just like to point out that we have sort of a nice geographic distribution. So this is happening in many, many different places, not just one or two institutions. And so I think that this is a nice way to highlight a wide range of different opportunities. But before we get too far, we want to find out who's here and why you're here. So we have a couple poll questions just to start out with. So I think Bradley's going to trigger a poll question. So what institution are you representing today? And if you're representing more than one, sort of pick the one you decide you want to be representing. But so just sort of, pick which one you are representing. And if it's other, feel free to put in the chat what that other is. I just submitted my response. But I, as a result, have no idea when it's done, but I will let Bradley share the results when she's ready. As you can see from our introductions, we are all representing 2-year colleges, and that seems to be the dominant group who's here today, so that's great. But we also have some representatives from 4-year colleges and universities, which is also fabulous in that, part of what we'll be talking about are partnerships. And so I think that this is a great opportunity to kind of have some of those conversations. Our next poll question is just to kind of get a sense of who's been involved in research. So have you done research with students before? Just keeping it pretty simple. Yes, no, or maybe, sort of. And I guess, with a large number of panel members, we're kind of biasing our results, but so excellent. So we have some who have not done it before, some who are really quite sure, but the majority of people have at least done some aspect of it. So that's great. So we have a wide array. And so we recognize that many of you probably also have expertise that you would like to share. And so we'll also have opportunities, the first of which is, in the chat, why would you want to, or why do you do research in your class or with your students? So feel free to throw into the chat some of the reasons why you're engaging in research, or why you're here today and want to engage in research, in learning about how to engage in research with your students. This is great. So we've got, sort of basically partner, being able to prepare our students for four-year college experience, student enrichment. We learn best when we learn by doing. Love that's a great quote, Nicole. Preparing transfer students, engagement, curiosity keeps me excited. I think that's a really great point, right? It's also about us and how do we stay engaged with our content, with our students, helping our students really understand the scientific method and what that means. Project-based learning is a nice sort of gateway drug into the undergraduate experience, and is a legitimate in and of itself too. So really, right, so diving deeper into a topic. There's some great examples here in the chat. This is wonderful. I'm not going to be able to kind of hit them all, but sort of moving away from some of that passive into more of sort of an active experience. So, there's research to support why this is something that you'd want to do. I'm not going to read each of these bullets, but the idea is we're helping our students both learn content, gain skills. Some of the things you were just saying in the chat helps them develop things that are sort of workplace skills, which is an interesting article came out in GSA Today just recently, sort of talking about what employers are looking for in hiring geoscience majors. And, sort of a lot of these are the types of skills that you would gain through doing research. And so, this can also be a hook to help with interest, to help with identity development. So when we think about this through an equity lens, providing access and opportunities for students, particularly in that sort of early stages of their educational experience, it helps create just better informed citizens, regardless of what their major is, right? Like we want our students to understand how science works. And this is a way to really appreciate some of the messiness that comes with science. So there are many different operational definitions of undergraduate research. We're sort of working with the one that came from the Community College Undergraduate Research Experience Summit, which is those that use the scientific method and or the engineering design process to promote student learning by investigating a problem where the solution is unknown to students or to faculty. And I think that unknown piece is so critical, right? Like we don't know what the answer is. There's not a given outcome. And so there's been a little bit of debate as to what that means in terms of, we put research in quotation marks, but why is it in quotation marks? Well, personally, I feel like if it's unknown, then they are contributing to the broader base of knowledge. But some might argue, and I know Dave does, and I don't think we have quite time to let him argue it out, although I'll let him do it later. But it's sort of the idea that maybe because it's not really earth-shattering research, maybe it sort of should be somewhat within quotes. And maybe Dave, I'm miscategorizing your thinking there.
Well, thank you, Katja. I'll just jump in for a second. So my argument is that it's certainly, as long as it's certainly unknown to the student, it can be unknown to, it could be known to the faculty member, but if it's an original activity for the student, I think that's the process. So, I'll talk about some things that I do that, I sort of know what the answer is going to be, but it's unknown to the students. So that's why we call it research. Because a lot of people think it has to be an original contribution to the science, and I argue that it doesn't necessarily need to be a contribution to science. It needs to be the contribution to the growth of the student, and so they understand what the scientific method is about.
Right. But I think it's important to make sure the caveat is there, that it's not that we know what the answer is and that it's a canned lab, right? I think that's the distinction too, in that research is not something that's pre-canned where we automatically kind of know that outcome. But we have a pretty good idea of what that outcome is going to be because we've seen them do research, tested the pH of this water 1,500 times. And so we have a pretty good confidence of what that pH is going to be. So I think that's sort of that unknown variable. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on it too much right now, but there is sort of a continuum we can kind of think about when we think about research, both in terms of we look at it through the student experience. So whether this is sort of student process centered versus outcome product centered, and that there's a lot of flexibility in what this looks like and can range across different modalities, different locations, different types of experiences for the student, for the outcome of who's involved. And so it can be sort of very small scope and it can be much larger scope. And so I think that that's also where our freedom comes in some of our ability to think about research, is that there's a lot of flexibility here. And this diagram comes from the Beckman and Hensel paper, but the way that this particular diagram is couched is from the blog that Laura Guertin wrote. And so we actually have a link to that blog post within, or we will within the webinar page from today. Another way of thinking about a sort of location of where it's happening. So within the research spectrum, we have this sort of through this 2YC lens, right? We sort of have it specifically within classes. So our course-based undergraduate research experiences versus in sort of independent study research outside of the class, moving to collaboration with two-year college, four-year college, to being two-year college students at a four-year college institution, and then nationwide REU type experiences, research experiences for undergraduates. So there's a wide range. We're going to look at that spectrum, sort of starting from sort of focused in the classroom and ranging from there. So that's sort of the rationale for the order of who we have presenting today. Dave, did you want to kind of kick off the discussion of what we're going to be saying?
So the next bulk of the presentation is going to be on different examples of different kinds of research, or what some people have said, experimental learning opportunities. So we're going to talk about sort of course-based undergraduate research experiences within the course, and to sort of merge into collaborations between 2YC's and 4YC's, and then sort of talk a little about the 4YC in general. So
yeah. And I think, and I am next. And but the key here is that as we're presenting, we probably won't be able to answer questions in the chat, but if you have questions, please post them in the chat, because as soon as we're done talking, we'll be able to actually spend a little bit more time looking at those questions in the chat and responding in real time. But there will also be sort of an opportunity for sort of checking in at the end as well. So there's going to be opportunities to sort of ask questions throughout all of this. But if you're thinking of questions as someone's presenting, feel free to ask it in the moment.
Yeah, so there will be some time to theoretically consult with some of the people that have been presenting at the end, after you had some time to think about what we've just listened to. So,
yes.
Katja.
So I want to talk about CURES, the course-based undergraduate research experiences. So at Whatcom, we use this really as an equity focus. And the idea is that when students are engaged in a course-based experience, everybody's experiencing it, so that there's not sort of a self-filtering out of identifying, oh, I should be doing this, I belong in this field, I don't belong in this field. Everybody's experiencing it, so everybody has an opportunity to engage in that research and have an opportunity to sort of see themselves in that role. And it's happening across many, many, many different disciplines. So it's not just happening in the geosciences on our campus. And the work we're doing is part of an NSF grant to really kind of better understand how we can support faculty. But that's a different conversation. What I wanted to sort of couch is that we have multiple approaches of how we're doing CURES. So we have a common class problem, which I'll talk a little bit more about in my next slide. Students develop questions sort of from scratch in multiple different classes. We have legacy research, where students do some piece of research and then pass that on to the next class. And that class then works and develops it into another problem and builds on it and passes it on to another class. We also have some service-based research experiences where students are actually working with community members and then reporting back to those community stakeholders. And I think we'll hear more about some of that aspect from Laura a little bit. So what I wanted to just briefly describe is sort of one of those big overarching questions. So in my introduction to earth science class, non-majors class, I asked them to kind of examine how healthy is our watershed. And so we sort of start it, I work on a quarter system, so we only have 12 weeks to get through all of this. So the first few weeks are just getting to know each other, getting to know class content, so they get a little bit under their belt before they actually engage in the research. In week 4, I introduced the project and we explored different methods. And actually, when we went online, we were able to mail lab kits, so the really cheap things like just water quality testing kind of stuff. But then we move into week 5, we do a crowdsourcing literature review. So no one student has to do all of the literature review. They're each doing one little piece that then they share and collaboratively share and learn together, so that they're building an understanding of how people do research on watersheds. And then we brainstorm research questions. By week 6, they have their question refined. They submit a proposal. That's what their research question is. who they're going to work with so that the teams are developed around interest-based topics and what their methodology is going to be. Week 7 and 8, they're collecting data. One of the advantages of not doing it face-to-face, but doing it online was that students went to where they lived. So this map below represents all the different places where students were actually collecting their data and all the different methods and what they were using. So while no one person is able to answer the question about the health of the watershed, collaboratively, collectively, they can kind of come up with a larger sort of answer to that question. So then they go through a peer review process so that then they actually can do their work early, get feedback on it before they actually have a final product, which then they share out with sort of the college community. So that's one example of what a cure might look like and how you kind of disperse it throughout the course while also learning the content. I'm going to advance it to Dave.
Thank you, Katja. So I'm going to address a common complaint that a lot of people, well, I don't have the money, I don't have the resources to do research. And I'm going to give you three examples where it's pretty cheap, and one where it's a little bit more expensive. So on the bottom left, you can see a student is doing some dendrochronology. So basically taking tree cores, and Laura will talk about some of her work with other ways, banding trees. But this is one way you can get students involved in looking at the time sequence and do their own research. So the research question is a little bit more focused, but the dendrochronology equipment is maybe $100 or so from a forestry supply place. And so if you have a lot of trees, obviously you want to get permission from your groundskeeper folks before you start drilling holes in it. But outside the image that you can see, when I took the image, there was several grounds people that were involved in it. So it was actually well supported by the administration. So, and the student who did that research, she was doing as part of an honors project, and she went on and gave a presentation of her work at a poster competition for local two-year colleges. On the top middle is an image of an earthquake. So we have a very simple seismometer called an AS1 seismometer, where we record data. We've been recording earthquakes from around the world for about 17 years now, and we've been recording about 70 to 90 events every year. And I've had a couple of students use the database to look at some tectonic questions and try to figure out why we record some earthquakes and why we don't. So again, if you have a student that's a little bit more interested in seismology, that's a fairly reasonable option. On the right-hand side is we are fortunate enough to have some wetlands right near campus. So on the right-hand side, you can see the white PVC tube at the top. The metal tube is what was called a well point. So what you're able to do, if of course it depends upon your grounds on your campus, you can, and how deep obviously your groundwater table is, you could, for the well point is about $90 from a local hardware store. You can go to the hardware store and install a groundwater well, monitoring well. And of course, once you have that, you have ways to monitor the water table. You have ways to monitor and sample the groundwater. I've been using those data
and convert it into Sway, so you don't have to retype everything. So let me.
Hello. So I've been using the monitoring wells for exercises and labs, as well as independent research. Again, students have brought those some of those results to the our STEM poster competition and done quite well. Again, it obviously depends upon your local geology on how active or how energetic you may want to be to basically drilling the well. Again, we were lucky it's within a few feet of the surface. It was easy digging, so we got that in pretty quickly. In the middle of the bottom is a sample of what's called screen wash. So I was involved in a mastodon dig in Aurora, right close to the Waubonsie campus, and we were looking for an archaeological dig, looking for supposedly the remains of a mastodon that or an additional mastodon find that was left after 1936. So it's a little complex story, but the bottom line is that this is material left over from that dig, and we have literally gallons and gallons of this screen wash. And I have my students in classes, and I have had a student again do another honors project where she did a presentation and a poster competition. So you can have them sort through the data, sort through the screen wash, and if you look carefully, you can see maybe some gastropod shells. There is a whole suite of gastropods, so you can have your students do some environmental reconstruction. And you may say, well, I can't do that because I don't have this on my campus. You're wrong, because I will send to you as much of the screen wash as you need for any students, either labs or research projects. So don't worry about not needing it. Get in touch with me, and I can send you literally a couple of gallons of screen wash for whatever you want to do for either research or class projects. Okay, thank you. And next presentation will be by Laura.
Great, thanks. And hello, everyone. My name is Laura Gerton. I'm at Penn State Brandywine, right outside of Philadelphia. I teach mostly students in their first 2 years, and they transfer to either another Penn State campus or another university to finish up their undergraduate degrees. So I love to do hands-on work to get students engaged and involved. And for those of you, especially that might be starting out with doing these types of experiential learning in your classrooms, you don't need to start from scratch. Maybe look to existing projects. And I like to tap into citizen science projects. These are designed already, they're online. They usually have minimal equipment that's involved. It's something that students can do right there in their local area to get them connected with their own surroundings. And they can provide an opportunity not for just the students to feel like they're doing something that contributes to a larger project. They know that other scientists are going to be looking at information that they're collecting, but you can also tweak and modify that information in terms of creating a long-term database for your campus. So I list on the left-hand side 2 example websites. You can look at the SciStarter and Citizen Science are great examples of where you can find a whole catalog of different types of citizen science projects. I've got photos of 2 of my students here. I have Kimmy on the left, and on the right-hand side is the tree banding project that John is working on here. So what Kimmy's doing for the Picture Post project is actually taking photos, and it can be done with a cell phone, which students all have. And there's an app that they can upload their photos. And what it's doing is looking at seasonal changes, which you can do again right on your own campus. You might have also seen, if you follow the AGU blogs, that there was another type of photo documentation project that happens over time that they just posted about a few days ago too. The tree banding project was fun for us to do on campus because we actually were able to band trees across the campus. And even though the project was done through the Smithsonian Institution, they only wanted data twice a year. We actually took measurements throughout the entire year, every 2 weeks. Even when our school was closed over the semester break, students were coming through the snow. They were so dedicated to collecting this data. And what was wonderful is that when you only collect twice a year, you just get 2 points, which is a straight line. By us increasing the frequency of data collection, we were able to see the seasonal growth of the trees, which just added a whole nother dimension, which was wonderful. Other apps, I'll mention the Globe Observer app, lots of, again, ways to observe your environment, what's going on. Once in a while, they will put special campaigns within there. For example, when the solar eclipse happened a couple of years ago, they added an app in there, another great way for students to collect data. NPing I use a lot because you can have students enter in, is it raining? Is it snowing? Is it hail? What's the difference between them and what's happening now? You can have students collect snowfall totals on your campus if you're in that geographic region like I am. So wonderful opportunities. Let's go to the next slide, Dave. Again, I encourage you to look at citizen science projects and thinking of a way you can kick them up a notch. Community-based projects are really important to us. My institution is the land grant institution for the state of Pennsylvania. So by default, we are committed to helping the people within our community. And so we like to look to our community partners and see what is it that they need. And sometimes it's hard because we can't provide what they're looking for. And it's hard to say no when they come asking. But there are ways that you can find, again, your student availability, transportation, equipment, what have you. One of the projects I'll mention was an enhanced podcasts project for a local state park. So that's the photo on the left-hand side. They had this wonderful 5-mile trail with these medallions on the trees. So there were numbers, and you could walk across the park and you would see the numbers on the trees. And then you were supposed to guess the species of the tree and then walk the 5 miles back to the park office to check and see out of all 50 trees tagged on the 5-mile trail if you got the answer right. So what my students did was develop an audio file, a podcast that could be downloaded. And so when people got to a tree, they hit the podcast and they learned information. Was it a native species? Was it an invasive species? All sorts of information. The photo on the right relates to a plant sale from a local arboretum. They had little signs that didn't give people a lot of information. So they wanted people to learn more. My students designed QR codes that then opened up to websites, and they actually tracked what information visitors were able to get going to this plant sale and such. The last community project I'll mention, Bring Out Your Dead. That's not the accurate title. I had Monty Python on my head when I made this slide. I'm so sorry. It was actually called Tombstones and Spirits. Collaborative project with the cemetery across the street, where art students, American Studies students, bio students all did an open house, an open walking tour, each student specializing in their discipline there. On the right-hand side are just some tips of how you can help students package and market this material upon transfer. My contact info is at the bottom of the slide, and I'm more than willing to share some additional information about that with you in the future.
Hi, so I'm going to talk about what I call low stakes research. And low stakes research, I consider any kind of project that we do that doesn't really have a grade associated with it and outcomes associated with it. It gives the students an opportunity to come out into the field, to work with other students and other faculty, to get involved with some research and explore the discipline to see if there's any interest in it. For this kind of work, what we typically do is we work with our larger research projects. Typically, they're going to be my research projects that I'm engaged in the community. But we've worked with other areas in terms of graduate student work at Stony Brook University and a few other research projects around the region. The general idea here is what we try to do is make these available or accessible to any student who's possibly thinking about getting engaged in either the geosciences or just thinking about research in general. Very little discipline knowledge is used. So what we tend to do is we just tell people we're going to show up at a location. We provide a general overview of the projects that we're looking at, and we provide them data sheets and a quick, basically a quick instruction set of what we're going to do that day to engage the student and to collect some data that will then be used for the projects that we're working on. For example, in the project that you see to the right of your screen, I have a couple shown. One is what we call the Shiny Rock Project that was actually brought to my attention from a local archaeological group who was studying Native American artifacts and came up with these shiny rocks, and they didn't know what they were. After a little bit of research, we realized that they were rocks that had desert varnish on. And we wanted to see, were these being collected in a ceremonial aspect, or were these things that were ubiquitous in the environment? In one project, we just asked students to come out to the beach and collect and record on GIS. And that's that image that you see in the background, looking at counts and getting to the understanding of, was this something that was ubiquitous, which it turns out that it looks like it is ubiquitous layer within our moraine structure, or was it in the ceremonial landscape? Along that same point, when we had those students out doing the Shiny Rock study, we had one of our students who was a geology major who had a question about longshore drift and was wondering if longshore drift actually changed the particle size, if we can see particle size changing. So we had something that was a low stakes research project lead into an independent research project for the students. And they actually engaged in a project. That's that middle image where you see students looking under the microscopes. One of the students at the end of that table actually was looking at Fire Island and started a research project where she collected samples from Montauk all the way to Jones Beach, which is in the middle of Long Island to the end of Long Island, to see if there was any change in grain size as we moved across that area. And as a result, she indeed found a change in the grain size and was able to identify cut-throughs from different hurricanes as we were refilling inlets as we go. The important part was there was absolutely nothing that they needed to prepare for to get to that project. They came, they engaged, they worked with each other. And from that, she actually has gone on now to a PhD program in geology at Stony Brook, and she still continues to study some of the coastal processes that are occurring. What we found through these projects, because there is no real discipline knowledge involved, the students actually work together with each other, and we found that the students who are the geology major, the marine science majors, actually start to develop a stronger science identity, because as the other students are working with them, they're picking them out and saying, "You're the geologist, can you help me?" Or the students are self-identifying as students have questions about what they see. A marine science student might say, "I'm a marine science major. I can explain what you're looking at. So we see this really goes a long way of helping develop the science identity of our students. Next slide, please. Along those same lines, we also do a little more of those quote unquote research things. And these are research-based workshops where we actually have programs at the college where students aren't necessarily doing workshops, they're learning skills, but those skills are tied to ongoing data collection that is occurring through research. So they're learning about research in an area, about careers that are possibly available to them while they're actually developing skills that they can use within the rest of their program, whether that's Excel, Python, surveying, or sampling. It's a little bit different because it requires a little more legwork on our end to put these workshops together. But again, it's a low-cost experience, and it gives the students not only a sense of belonging in the institution, but a skill to move on with. And next.
I was about to give you your 1-minute warning, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm kind of excited to share this with you, but I was trying to figure out where this project fit along that continuum. And I think this falls in that independent study outside of class, because the students who could participate in that were any student in our Maricopa Community College district system. And we were collaborating with some students from four-year colleges as well. But this was an NSF-funded collaborative research project where we had our 2-year students in field-based interdisciplinary research, and we were using the Rock Art Stability Index. So this was all done at the Petrified Forest National Park. And this park is well known for its paleontological resources, but not so much for the cultural resources that are there. And they have numerous cultural resources. So the challenge for the park was that they're required by Congress to value all cultural resources. And it's hard to value petroglyphs or rock art in any way because it can't be sold. And so they were valuing it as good condition, fair condition, or poor condition. And a lot of that depended on how hard it was to hike out to the site. So we started using the Rock Art Stability Index, which is an index that I created that contains about 36 weathering characteristics that you test by site. So what this allowed for was the park to get a baseline value of all of their cultural resources in terms of rock art. So the exciting thing for me in this as well is that we were the lead institution of the project that was NSF funded, which means my institution took less overhead than the universities do. So there was a little more money to work with. It spanned about 8 semesters, plus some summers and winter intersession. But we went at least 2 times per semester. So students could participate as many times as they wanted. And one of our challenges was that we had frequent flyers that we had to kind of beat off the school van because they kept wanting to come back. But we did have the resource then to utilize their expertise for new students because we could span across wide areas of the desert actually. So the limited resources that we shared with the park. So the park has only so many resources for the job that they have to do. They provided us a place to stay, which was basically a 3-bedroom house kind of place, but it had a kitchen. So then we could feed a huge group of people like a family. And so it was quite affordable that way. The college provided the student data collectors, transportation, food, and field supplies. So we were able to collect a lot of information because the park is limited to 1 cultural resource person, a part-time person, and then maybe some summer help. And so there's no way they could go to all of the 3,500 plus rock art sites every year. So we did produce a baseline of rock decay stability as it relates to cultural stone. So very much a geoheritage project. And the students got to learn about weathering and erosion in a much more engaging way. So I was really impressed by the participant pride by the students. They became the authorized personnel only. It meant them, and they felt that it was really important. They got to go on certain roads, they got to go behind certain doors, and they felt like they were part of the park. And every single one of them told me that they took their family back to the park. So this is a huge thing for the National Park Service, is that now we have these people who are engaged, they feel like they're part of it, of this park, but that also bleeds into the other parks as well. So the National Park Service is essentially now part of a value structure within their life. Some of the biggest obstacles that we faced in this project were, again, keeping the numbers down. We wanted, the students wanted to come again and again. And so what's been fun about that is many of them have actually gone on to change their major to geosciences or study something related, and found value in that. The most positive result of this project was that every trip, every day, everything that we did, I mean, each site that we went to, new things kept popping up and became part of that learning experience. So in some of the photos that I have here, there was a lot of sitting on rocks. You found the most comfortable rocks, but you had to go through those 36 weathering characteristics by observation. So, but the picture on the upper right shows the National Park Service resource person teaching the students about pottery that is found in this area. And this was an area that people traveled through quite a bit. So there was a lot of trade that went on in this location. And the bottom right, you can see students pointing out the characteristics. And we didn't stage that one. That was actually just taken as the student was explaining to another student what they were looking at in the weathering characteristics. So this was a hugely valuable project. I could talk about it, you know, for the entire webinar. But I wanted to share this opportunity as a way to go. You don't necessarily need NSF funding. I think that we can also still go to this park and still share the resources in a valuable way. What the funding helped us with was gear and food. So, and those are the important things. Keep them fed, keep them happy. So that's what I'd like to share.
All right, so at Wake Tech Community College in North Carolina, where I am, our undergraduate research program has actually evolved a lot, and we now are actually at the point where we have things like cures and research on campus, but we didn't start that way. We had very limited resources, and the way we began offering research opportunities to our students was actually using other institutions to help provide those experiences to our students. And so we had a partnership between North Carolina State University, which is also here in Raleigh, and the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences here in Raleigh, where we would identify students of ours that were interested in possibly majoring in geoscience and then send them to those institutions for the summer to complete a research experience. And it was a fabulous thing for our students. We had 8 years for this project. A total of 80 students actually completed their research projects and presented a poster at the end of the summer. We had a lot of diversity in the program. That's one of the things we were trying to target, was we were trying to have a diverse set of students participating. And we had actually 2 different NSF grants that supported this work. And the second grant supported travel for the students. And we had a total of 11 students that were able to have an additional time presenting their research at a national or international geoscience meeting. The most impressive one was we had 2 students and 1 Wake Tech faculty member that actually traveled to Australia for a Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meeting. That was exciting. That also came with a lot of paperwork. But it was a really fantastic experience for the faculty and the 2 students. And the 2 photos I have here are some of the students that have participated. In the top is one of the students who went with the Museum of Natural Sciences on a dinosaur dig. And they had lots of fun going on those. And then 2 smiling students presenting their poster at the NC State Poster Symposium at the end of the summer. Next slide, please. Here are a lot of the strengths that came out of this particular partnership. For the students, it was flexible. They could develop schedules that worked for them and worked around their obligations as employees for other jobs, as parents, as whatever. We know at two-year colleges, we have students with all kinds of obligations. And so this program worked around their schedules. Most of the projects were also close to home. The students didn't have to travel. There were a few that involved travel, but the vast majority did not involve any kind of travel. For the four-year university, it was great because the faculty had an opportunity to try out some small seed projects without having to invest a lot of effort themselves. So they had students for 2 or 3 months working on something, and they could see, is this going to go anywhere? Can I pass this on to a master's student or a PhD student? Or is this kind of where it ends? So it was a good way for them to test things out. Also, NC State has a lot of REU programs in place. Ours was not one, but we were able to use their REU resources, including mentoring, ethics training, poster training. All of that was already built in, so we didn't have to come up with that. The university was able to provide it. For the museum, it was great because they had extra hands out in the field, and so that was always fantastic. For us as the two-year college faculty, we did not have to come up with the research projects. Like I said, now we've evolved the program and we are, but to start, we didn't really have the time or resources. And so we were able to provide this without having to stretch ourselves too thin. A lot of our students were able to mentor new students in following years. So that kind of kept this whole cohort thing going through the life of the program. And just the last point I want to make, students were paid to do research with the grant funding, but there are other ways you can incentivize this kind of thing. I have here such as course credit. There are other ways to give students a way of sort of owning it without actually paying them. And a couple more photos of our students presenting and participating in national meetings there. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Kusali Gamage from Austin Community College. This project describes an undergraduate summer research course in geosciences that was developed through a cross-institutional collaboration to support transfer students at the community college. My colleagues, Hugh Daigle and Chami Miller from UT Austin are the four-year faculty collaborators on this project. And our project was also funded by the NSF's GeoPaths program. The primary goal of our program was to increase transfer rates in geosciences and related STEM fields. So this was a pilot program, and we offered the program to 12 selected students during the summer for 2 consecutive years. In this program, we explicitly targeted transfer students with a strong interest in geoscience or in a STEM field, who have had some experience or some exposure to STEM at the college level. So by focusing on the transfer student population, we were able to design a research program that supports students with the tools needed to acquire both academic as well as practical knowledge. In addition to the academic support, we also combined that with financial support and mentoring support to kind of enhance the overall research experience. So the selected students received a stipend of $2,500, and that allowed our students to take time off from employment obligations. All of our students were working either full-time or part-time. In addition to the stipend, students also received a full tuition and a fee waiver. The research program was 12 weeks long, and it was offered as a 3-credit course where students worked in groups of 4. The program content was structured around primarily around scientific ocean drilling. Those are the expertise of myself and my colleagues. So during the 12 weeks, students developed hypotheses. They learned how to use different instrumentation. They collected, analyzed data. They conducted peer review. And at the end of the program, they formally presented their findings at a poster symposium that was organized by the 4-year institution. And they also presented their work at the AGU virtual poster session. Next slide, please. For the evaluation of the program, we use 3 data sources, the self-administered undergraduate research student self-assessment survey, faculty assessment of student performance and skills, and also institutional research data, including demographics, retention, and enrollment. By the end of the program, all students either had declared or intended to declare a STEM major. Of all students, 42% declared a major in the geosciences, 25% indicated they may choose geoscience as their major, and those who did not choose geoscience as their major, they indicated they had declared a major in either park management, I guess it was biology, ecology, or engineering. All of the participants thought that their research experience prepared them for a job. 92% agreed the research experience confirmed their interest in their field of study, and 83% of all the students are transferred to a 4-year institution within 2 years of this program. There are a number of challenges in developing research programs at 2-year colleges like this one here. I've listed 2 of the challenges here, a lack of funding and lack of faculty commitment. Grant funding was a key component in this program to be successful. We used grant funding to cover student stipends, tuition fee, faculty staff salaries, and lab supplies. But as you know, we can't exclusively rely on off grant funding. So one solution for that is to build collaborations with 2YC faculty that already have funding to support 2YC student research. Another more structural solution would be to develop institutional support, and that would also address both of these challenges to some extent. And we believe that institutional support that funds and rewards faculty participation in research can play an important role for faculty buy-in, particularly at the 2YCs. So if you're interested in developing a similar program, you can check out the JGE publication listed here. It's open access. In the supplementary documents of this paper, you can find our course curriculum, rubrics, student surveys, as well as student posters. The second resource here is the link to the NSF GeoPath solicitation. The new solicitation does not have a deadline, so you can submit your proposal anytime. And I can also post this in the chat. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks,
Thank you
thanks, Kusali. Some great ideas that were just presented, and I think with a wide range of things for you to consider. So we thought that you might want to take just a couple of minutes to think about what you had just heard, and to maybe think about what you would like to know more about, or maybe what you would like to try to bring into your own program in any different way. So maybe take a couple of minutes to think about those kinds of things and what kind of resources you might want to need. And so take a couple of minutes, and if you have some questions for some of the presenters or anybody else, please either put them in the chat, or maybe in a couple of minutes, just unmute yourself and or maybe raise your hand, and we'll call on you and you can ask your question. So just take a couple of minutes to think about what we just presented to you, and then we'll come back and have a wrap up and some discussion and some networking for undergraduate research.
Right. I think the key is that we really want to sort of honor and respect the opportunity for people to just have some quiet time to really sort of think and reflect on what you just heard. So we're not going to say anything for a few minutes. There are definitely some great questions coming up in the chat, but we also want to kind of have an opportunity to sort of answer some of these verbally, but feel free to keep throwing questions in the chat if you have them, or feel free to raise your hand and you can ask the question as well. It can be targeted toward an individual, or it can be sort of a broader question. So there's sort of this great question about funding. And I think that I think Laura Guertin and I were just having a conversation about this recently, I think, and it was sort of that idea that don't feel you have to go the NSF route, although obviously NSF has lots of funds potential, some of which are now specifically targeted toward two-year colleges. So that also then to a certain extent shifts the dynamics of who you're competing against, which can help in some regards. But also think about local. Are there funding opportunities at your institution or locally? And I think Dave addressed that in the chat as well, right? Sort of think about multiple avenues. It doesn't just have to be all the way at the, sort of governmental, federal governmental level. Anybody else want to comment, or are there other, the continuity question? So who would like to address, how do those of you who are at 2YC deal with continuity of students and faculty as you move through these projects? Is your student turnover a challenge? And what about faculty continuity with so many of us being adjuncts, not knowing whether we are going to have the same classes the next semester? Is that something you can address?
So Jamie, I was halfway through typing something. So what continuity is an issue, obviously. So what a couple of suggestions, Katja has sort of pointed it out, an idea. I sort of point out an idea. Pick a subject where you pick a research topic that you can have multiple people contributing multiple data over time. So like the study of a watershed, the watershed can be investigated over multiple ways, over multiple times. Examining groundwater. So again, the groundwater is always changing. I know at Mount SAC, they do a lot of studying of river channels and the migration and morphology and evolution of river channels. So you can maybe do a study of a dynamic river that may be nearby. So the idea is that a given project by a given student is not the end of the project, that they just contribute one piece of the puzzle over a longer term study. Thank you, Katja.
I'd like to add to that too. That's the key to collaborations as well, right? If you design a great collaboration with some of your main transfer institutions, hopefully the students who are there and move on to transfer that institution can carry that research over. So that's one of the ways that we've handled it at Suffolk Community College, and that was the example I gave in our presentation, where the student took what she was doing at the community college and then brought that right to the four-year institution.
Kusali, do you want to address sort of your perspective as an adjunct faculty? I mean, I realize it's
yes, Katja. So,
one adjunct faculty of many, but I think certainly it's an important perspective to bring.
I was thinking what to say because it's tough, and this is something that NSF will also question you when you submit a proposal, being an adjunct, and what is your commitment, long-term commitment. So one of the things is that doing research will benefit your department, your institution, and so showing them that what you're going to bring into the college, that will help you kind of have them committed to give you classes for like 3 years, 3 consecutive years, or during the length of the program. So that's something that it's kind of a negotiation that you do with your department institution. I'm doing a research project and I need this class. You need to offer me this class 3 semesters in a row, so you can negotiate, and at least I can do that in my department to some level. But of course, if you bring in money from NSF or some other grant, they'll be happy to do that. So you have to have those conversations with your department and your higher administration.
Thank you. Those are all great.
Excellent. So Denise asks, our course is really set up for students to pursue their own research questions. What's the best way to start recruiting students? Denise, could you potentially clarify that just a little bit?
So we set up an interdisciplinary research course so that we didn't have to make a separate one for each discipline. So you just have to kind of hit on 2 different disciplines in it. So it's pretty easy to do. So we didn't have to have a separate one for physical, geosciences, biological, microbiology. So we have one course that kind of fits everybody's needs, and different instructors can kind of tailor it if they want to, but it's really meant for students to pursue their own, create their own research question, do the research, do the background search. So trying to get funding for it is a little bit tricky because we don't have a set research that they're going into. It's not, they're not continuing it from semester to semester. They're able to take the course twice for credit. So if they wanted to do a longer project, they could do that for additional credit. So trying to get, equipment that's available, as well as recruiting students into the course and guide them when, you may not be the expert exactly in that field, because we do somewhat teach a little bit between disciplines,
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that both keeps it fresh and interesting for me, is that I end up learning about research areas I know very little about and learn with my students, right? And I think that's part of some of that aspect. I don't know if that's quite what you're answering. That doesn't necessarily help your question, but it does make me think about Nicole's classic quote that I'm probably going to mangle, so I might make Nicole say it, which is like, when you're doing research with undergraduates at the 2-year college, it requires you to have a healthy, what is it, Nicole? Help me out here. Healthy willingness.
A healthy disregard for the impossible.
That's right.
For sure.
Does anybody else want to we're just about out of time. So does anybody else want to briefly respond to that, or? All right. There's some other great questions in the chat. Zach, I'll get back to you, since I know where to find you, but if there's, other questions, I think Bradley said that she would sort of send to us as well, but we can also continue responding in the chat while I kind of get to the last slide here, just sort of somewhat self-interest, but also just letting you know, if you want to spend more time on this and really explore this in a little bit more detail, we have an afternoon session at the Earth Educator Rendezvous, undergraduate research in the first 2 years. And so really kind of spending a little bit more time digging deeper into some of these ideas and what that might look like for your own context, but have an opportunity to get feedback from other people at that workshop to be able to kind of delve into some of those ideas. So if you're planning to go to the Earth Educator Rendezvous, or you live in the Twin Cities area, it's because it's just one afternoon, it might not justify the whole Earth Educator Rendezvous, but I don't know, maybe it does. But it's an opportunity to kind of delve a little bit more into this. So I wanted to let you know that this is an opportunity, something that you can explore further. And I'm guessing Bradley has something she would like to say here at the very end too.
Yes, I do. First and foremost, thank you so much to all of our presenters. This was super, super helpful, super great information. And yes, we will be posting resources and recordings and answers to questions on the website, along with a giant list of resources that are already there. So definitely check out the website in the upcoming days. We also would ask you to fill out the webinar evaluation. I just posted a link into the chat. These surveys are super short, super quick and easy, not painful at all, and they help us out a lot. We get a ton of information, and this will help us provide more resources and more webinars like this in the future. So take a couple seconds to fill that out. Just a quick plug for our next webinar. It is scheduled for Thursday, March 17th, and it's called "Why is If It Can't Be Grown, It Must Be Mined Important in Your Science Classroom?" So if you are interested in that type of information, or you want to attend another webinar, registration for that is open, and you can find that on the NAGT website. We will stick around for a couple minutes, but thank you everyone, and I hope you guys have a great weekend coming up.